The UN's outgoing envoy to Libya defends his decision to accept a job in the UAE. Many say this raises questions over his impartiality as the Gulf nation backs one side in the Libyan conflict. So what will this mean for UN-led talks to form a unity government? This is Inside Story. And a very warm welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. Libya's post-revolutionary struggle is sometimes forgotten in a region that is marked by so much violence and chaos. For the past year and a half, rival militias loyal to rival governments have been fighting what could be described as a low-level civil war. And despite the best efforts of this man, outgoing UN envoy to Libya, Bernardino Leon, both sides have rejected the terms of a peace deal. But now Leon himself is the subject of controversy after it was revealed that he'd been negotiating a high-paid job with the United Arab Emirates, one of the countries most involved in Libya. The failure to disarm the militias that fought against Muammar Gaddafi has effectively turned Libya into a series of rival city-states. And as we've been saying, that's complicated by the fact that Libya has not one set of rulers, but two. There's the UN-recognised government based in the eastern city of Tobruk, also backed by the UAE and other regional players. Its forces are scattered across the country, led by former General Khalifa Haftar. Then there's the legally installed government in Tripoli that replaced the General National Congress. It's backed by Turkey and Qatar and has accused Leon of being biased in favour of Tobruk. The Libya Dawn and Libya Shield militias support the government in Tripoli and have forces in the capital and elsewhere. They've been fighting with Tobruk-backed forces in Benghazi, where al-Qaeda affiliate Ansar al-Sharia has a presence as well. And then, of course, there's the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant controlling the coastal city of Sirte. Lots to discuss. Let's bring in our guests straight away. In London, we have Anas El-Gomati, director of the Tripoli-based Sadeq Institute. In Tobruk, Mohammed El-Jar, a fellow for Atlantic Council's Hariri Centre for the Middle East. And also in London, Riccardo Fabiani, a senior analyst on North Africa for Eurasia Group. As we said, lots to talk about. Let me start off with you, Mohammed El-Jar. When it comes to Bernardino Leon, do you think the fallout is justified or has it been blown out of proportion?
No, I think it's justified. And I think it's the tip of the iceberg because it puts a question on the neutrality of the mediator who has been trying to broker a deal in Libya. It puts questions such as, was he really working for the interests of Libya or was he just working for the interests of his next paycheck? Now this puts, and as I said, this is only the tip of the iceberg because it is not just the UAE that are involved in Libya, whether with their money, weapons, or support for one of the sides of the civil war that's taking place in Libya. You have Qatar as well. We don't know how much money or how much influence is being put there in order to influence the international community's apparatus that's working in Libya. We have Turkey, we have Egypt, and we have other regional players as well. And it is not just about landing a job. I am sure there is a lot more to do with defense contractors, security companies, etc. So no, this is an important revelation, and I think more needs to come out with regards to the handling of the crisis in Libya, because it looks like the interests of certain nations, the interests of certain individuals that have been entrusted with the peace process in Libya have taken over.
And as El-Gomati, I was watching you sighing there. What's wrong with that?
No, there's nothing wrong with that. I think the situation sort of requires a sigh, but I think ultimately we have to kind of zone in on the nature of the relationship, and I agree with Mohammed to a certain degree that this is the tip of the iceberg with respect to the way in which Libya has unravelled. But particularly with this episode, one of the main concerning features is the degree to which direction was given by members of Operation Dignity, by instructions were given by a foreign government. And I suppose, yes, many of the international community, or many of the members of the international community that are involved in one way or another, or one facet or another in this war, will have tried to try and get their hands on the levers. But it seems that the UAE were far ahead in that respect, in that race, and were providing instruction. And I think the main problem here is that it's regrettable. It's damaged the integrity of the UN mission. It's damaged the trust that had been placed in the hands of Bernardino Leon to broker an honest peace amongst many of the Libyans. And it's played into the hands of many of those naysayers that have been saying all along, this is about a foreign policy objective that seeks to oust revolutionary change in the Arab world. It seeks to oust the Islamist actors that are looking for political life in Libya and look like the last man standing after the episodes of Egypt and to a certain degree the episodes in Tunisia over the last 2 years, but try to, as a foreign policy ambition, wipe out and eradicate the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, some members of the Libyan Dawn coalition see that as just not only wiping out the Muslim Brotherhood from the ballot box, but effectively wiping out any name from the ballot box, as was the case in Egypt. And I think in that respect, this role and this position on one day is not going to go away anytime fast. It's not going to go away very soon from this sentiment from the streets in the Arab world, if we're going to use that term, but most likely from those that have already been in Libya fighting on the front lines, that have already had so much bad blood amongst both of the various military sides, and that had already, until as early as last week when I'd spoken to many of the militias and the katibas that had been fighting on the ground, had said without these revelations that they distrusted and they had no trust in the process led by Leon. This will only serve that objective. That will only serve the hardliner objective, which has been two things: ultimately trying to exclude one of the two sides from this process at a national level, from government, from institutions in the government, from the state, and from the political life in general, in order to try and make them go from political actors into military cannon fodder. And this is, let's not kid ourselves, this is a military battle. Nothing is being said about a peace treaty. This is just a national unity government, and both sides want to wipe each other out. This is just another card, and this is just another deck in the ability of those actors to then say, well, look, we were right all along.
All right, you raised many issues there, but both of you agree that this is the tip of the iceberg, your words. Riccardo Fabiani, what do you think Leon was thinking?
I mean, what Leon did was obviously very inappropriate, but it's actually relatively common when it comes to politicians or high-level officials in Europe, for example, or in the US. So obviously he probably thought that he could get away with it, like many other politicians or high-level officials have gotten away with it in Europe or in the US, as I said. So obviously this is a real issue, though, and this is probably what Leon underestimated. The real issue is that not only he has lost personal credibility and the trust and the confidence of the various Libyan parties in the peace process, but he's also basically managed to undermine the credibility and the political capital of the UN peace process itself, of the UN mission in Libya. And I think this is the biggest problem now, because with Leon leaving his post, his position, now the risk is that the problem will not just go away with the new special envoy, that the Libyan parties will continue to mistrust whoever comes and replaces Leon. So
because
this is going to be the real challenge now.
Some of the players would consider him a dishonest broker, especially in the light of the email that was revealed from Leon to the UAE foreign minister, saying that he had a strategy to completely delegitimize the Tripoli government.
I mean, this is not really a surprise. It was, I would say, quite clear if you looked at the peace process over the past few months that no one really believed in the possibility of having the GNC and the Tripoli authorities on board with a final agreement with the national unity government. So what is really surprising here is actually that he was emailing this, that he was messaging this to the Emiratis, and he was basically asking for their blessing, their permission to do this. This is the real political problem, not the fact that he was aiming for a national unity government or a deal that would include as many Libyan actors as possible, but not all of them.
Mohammed, how much does this undermine the UN? if you are in that camp? I mean, will the UN still be able to do their work? And if the UN cannot do their work, who's there to replace them?
These revelations definitely undermine the important role of the United Nations in Libya. It also undermines the role of the next UN envoy to Libya. And however, I believe that the UN needs to find a way of handling this problem and dealing with it in the best way possible. And I don't think that throughout the last 4 years that Libyans have been able to come together and sort their problems out. And it is because of that I think the role of the international community is extremely important in that regard. However, I just want to emphasize also that the problem is that there are many Libyan politicians, many key Libyan politicians who seem to have put all of their eggs into Leon's basket by arguing that he is an honest broker, that he is the man who has been trying to sort Libya's problems out, and they have been defending him throughout this peace process. These key Libyan interlocutors that have been identified through the last 4 years, throughout the peace process throughout the last year, will find themselves in an extremely difficult situation due to the new revelations regarding Leon, and they will have to be replaced somehow. And finding new brokers and new interlocutors in Libya will not be an easy task. I think in answer to your first question, there has been attempts by Libyan leaders from the GNC and the House of Representatives to try and get together as an alternative to the UN peace process and try and sort the problem out in a Libyan way, rather than having a mediator that they did not trust. And I believe that I agree with Anas there that the new revelations will only serve the agenda of the hardliners on Libya's political scene.
Okay, Anas, I mean, do you think the new envoy, Martin Kobler, stands a chance if the international community in the camp of the UN has been so discredited?
Well, I think he serves a chance if perhaps they launch a full investigation into the dealings and into the dealings of those that have dealt with Bernardino Leon. And if the UN or even the European Union or even the US, as the backers of the UN and as the backers of the P5 members of the Security Council, find some teeth. And what I mean by that is if they really kind of follow through with many of the threats that they've issued over the last few years. Now, we understand that Libya's problems extend far beyond its borders, but how does the UN's influence stretch beyond Libya's borders? Do they really stretch? Do they stretch beyond Cairo? And do they view the foreign policy within Libya in purely Libyan terms? Or are they trying to weigh up what is happening in Iran when they try to kind of sanction certain members of the GCC? So what we really have to try to do here is understand whether or not A, they can find their credibility by launching a full investigation, but B, do they have the ability to actually follow through with many of the threats? And I don't think today that they do. I think with Kobler's appointment, I think we see two things. The first and the most important fact is his CV. He was in Afghanistan during the war on terror, and he was there during a very, very tightly guarded mission within the country in 2001. Or just post-2001's intervention. He was also in post-2003 intervention in Iraq. And so he's also followed through not only in that intervention, but also during both expeditions, during the war on terror, during green zone activity in both of these two countries. Now, that sort of gives you an indication as to where the international community view Libya at this time. They don't believe that Libya is a safe place. They don't necessarily believe that, and I think perhaps speaking skeptically here, but honestly, I don't think they believe that Libya really has a democratic fighting chance here, that Libya is going to be relegated to one of those countries that, you know, is caught on and is typified and hallmarked by the war on terror and by terrorism. And I think with that respect, Libyan leaders and Libyan decision makers and Libyan analysts should be aware of this, and they should be aware that now is the time to try and settle their differences in a fair and impartial way, a way in which, you know, allows for the pluralism which regrettably not even Bernardino Leon believed in when he said that he discredited other people. I kind of agree with your other guess, Ricardo, with respect of this is the kind of way that people kind of deal with negotiations, but that's almost like brushing it under the carpet. I understand that perhaps if we went and delved through all of his emails, I'm sure we'll find similar things being made or similar offers being made to the GNC, but not the level of instruction that was given by a foreign government that had direct involvement in the Libyan civil war, not the level of instruction and design by members of the Libyan, members of the international diplomatic efforts of the HOR and former presidents of Libya that have sided with one of the two sides in the conflict, and not by giving them instruction and design. So I don't think we can just sort of brush this under the carpet, be it by this is just the tip of the iceberg, or be it by this is another day in international diplomacy. This is a massive, massive problem that will not go away. People will not forget about this easily, and the UN now has a massive, massive upward battle to try to revive and defend its credibility, but also to try to make sure that Libyans in themselves want to end the war, that this is not about a peace process, this is just a unity government deal. No one is discussing peace. No one wants to have a peace, either between the two sides that are in the two chambers when they're discussing in Skhirat or Algiers or Geneva or elsewhere, nor on the battlefield. So how are we going to get that vital trust back? How are we going to get this trust back that if one side is in government, it's not going to wipe the other side out? If we look at the rhetoric...
Okay, let me throw some of those points to Ricardo, not least to mention, Ricardo, that these two sides are not speaking to each other. Also, they don't speak on behalf of many of these militant groups on the ground. You've got the growing threat of ISIL, as Anna said, many people consider Libya too dangerous, and it is, isn't it?
It is, but I think this is exactly the main point, the main issue here. I agree completely with Anas. Absolutely, this is the real problem now. The UN has to rebuild its credibility in the eyes of the various Libyan parties, and it will not be easy. And I think that Kobler is facing definitely an uphill battle. And he will need to send some clear signals to all parties that he is different. He needs to basically mark a break from the past. He's different from Bernardino Leon. And most importantly, I think what we need here, and this is something that many Libyans have already suggested, what we need here is a Libyan-led peace process, dialogue, rather than a UN-imposed peace process like we have seen over the past months. It's
okay,
not
but how is
easy,
that possible if nobody's
saying...
talking?
This is exactly what we need, right? We need a change from the past. We need a way to bypass this problem. Obviously, I am no diplomat, and I'm not in the mind of Kobler to know what he is planning to do. But I think that's what he would need, at least, to aim for here, because what we need is to get past basically these divisions and these ideas that either we impose a solution on them or the Libyans will never find a solution. This is I think, an approach that hasn't worked and will never work. What we need is actually a bottom-up process. But what ways, what shape this process will have, this is the key question at this stage.
Mohammed, to make this process happen, how important is it to bring in the regional players now? I mean, they all have a stake in Libya. Many people are calling it a proxy war.
It is very important. And yes, a proxy war has been taking place since the overthrow of the Gaddafi regime in Libya. And unless we hold these regional players accountable and put them in the picture, it will be very difficult to see how Libyans will be able to sit together and sort their differences out. Because it looks like countries like Qatar, UAE, Turkey and Egypt and so on are each channeling their orders to their Libyan proxies, and this is what makes the peace process in Libya extremely difficult because of the competing interests of regional players. And it was no laughing matter when some people suggested that there should be a dialogue on a regional level first, where Qatar, UAE, Egypt and Turkey are all at the table so that they can sort their differences out, and then we can hold a Libyan-led peace process in that regard. However, the question remains is who is really able to bring these countries together and stop them from meddling into Libya's affairs? I don't think that anyone is able, not the United States, not the EU, not the UN.
I suppose the real question, Anas, is who's in control here?
Who's in control? We have to be quite frank. It's mainly the militias that are in control. But who's in control of the militias? Well, whoever supplies the militias is genuinely in control. And I think that lesson was learnt 4 years ago in 2011 during the uprising and during the revolution, but has now spiraled out of control. And I don't think we can really say that any one actor is in control. But that's also the start of a diagnosis which could lead to a solution. We have to recalibrate the security apparatus in Libya to reflect these new imbalances, but also to understand how we can try and find a set of actors that can come together and create a monopoly on the legitimate use of force. The legitimacy should not come necessarily from only elections, though I believe that the democratic currency in the country is supremely of importance, but it should really come from the rule of law. Now, if we begin to treat all of these different actors in a way in which we believe that we can just sit them down together and hope that they hammer out a solution on their own, I don't necessarily think that is the only way it's going to have to work. There has to be principles for them which they provide a framework that we can build upon. And the principles are simple, that you cannot take a political actor and define him in military terms, that there has to be the notion of pluralism, that if someone takes power and then leaves power, that he is not to be harassed or to be taken under the guise of a military actor and wiped out or exterminated or anything else worse. We also have to understand that the rule of law here is the principle for them which any country can get on its feet and transition into a democracy. Without it, there absolutely is no way in which the country will ever transpire into a fledgling democracy or even a stuttering democracy. It will remain this failed state that we look at on the Mediterranean. And ultimately, we understand that ISIS is there, but we can't use ISIS or any other group or even Gaddafi or any other actor in the service of saying, well, let's just get him out of the way or them out of the way and then we'll come together. They have to hammer out their differences on the principle that nobody can, that there has to be a pluralism in Libya, that the military actors have to understand that if I exist, another person exists. If the political actors exist, another countering political actor will exist. If you don't have those two things there, if you don't have the pluralism and the rule of law there, this country won't get on to a start. And they have to find an icebreaker. Whether they find it.
Do you think everyone talks about Libya veering towards the abyss? You've got a decimated oil industry. Libya is all about oil. How long do you think Libya has at the moment?
Well, this is the question everybody keeps asking, and no one really has a clear answer to that. What we know is for sure that both governments have no access to oil revenues. Obviously, as you know, the central bank basically manages oil revenues and distributes them to pay for salaries and subsidies. And both governments basically face a looming fiscal crisis. And they have to act and do something about their situation. As we also know, the eastern authorities in Tobruk are also trying to bypass this problem by starting to sell oil on their own terms. But what we know is also that oil production and oil exports keep decreasing. And with oil prices at the current levels, this means that there is very little to fight over here, really, between the two governments. And I think this is a major incentive, or if you prefer, disincentive, for the two sides to reach some sort of compromise. What we need, though, is to make sure that neither side manages to bypass this obstacle, and they both basically are forced to deal with the issue of having no money and therefore having to reach some sort of compromise over the broader political issues that we have just been discussing.
And Mohammed, when you look at the human cost of what's happening in Libya, it's imperative that there's some sort of positive progress. Look at the thousands of refugees who are leaving the country and dying.
According to the latest report from the UN, 225,000 Libyans are in need of urgent assistance. The health system in Libya is collapsing. Libya's finances are eroding. There is a developing humanitarian crisis in Libya. People cannot afford bread in Libya these days due to the hiking prices of the dollars in the black market in Libya. The situation is extremely difficult, and this is the latest blow to the international community's efforts in Libya. And it's very, very important that they restore some sense of trust with the people of Libya by working on the developing humanitarian crisis in many parts of Libya.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Anas El Gomati in London, also in London, Riccardo Fabiani, and in Tobruk, Mohammed El Jah. Very interesting. Thank you very much. And as always, thank you for watching. You can leave your comments on the programme's page of our website, aljazeera.com. And you can post your views on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or tweet us at AJ Inside Story, or me at Jane Dutton. From me and the rest of the team, thank you very much for watching. Bye for now.